We are, again, the Poindexter family. We have been back in the States for about 4 months. And I just want to start by saying thank you for your faithfulness and your prayers and your support, and just giving us a chance to come give an update about what God's been doing these last 4 years. And then I want to share with you how God is leading us in the future. And then at the end, just kind of bring a challenge from the book of Acts today. So there we go. Who needs a remote? Well, again, this is our family. We're all here: Tabitha, Luke, Sylvia, right, and Ruben. And we took this when we're fresh off the field, and we're in the process of getting a prayer card made. So this is kind of like your picturesque, prayer card picture. But as we all know, this is really reality. This is what it looks like as you're coming back off the field and you're kind of going through the motions of getting reacclimated to life in the States. We've been living in Kyiv, Ukraine, and which is the capital of Ukraine there. This is a picture of the motherland statue, which was put up in the Soviet Union era. And we lived across the river. So as you look at the Dnieper River, we live, now it's working. About over there. City of about 3.5, 4 million people. One of our main ministries was with a ministry called the Church Ministries Institute. So I want to share a little bit about that with you, as well as some local church revitalization ministry we had a part of that you also had a part of by your support and prayers. This was a team of folks that I worked with, mainly there at the seminary with the Church Ministries Institute. Just kind of give you a brief overview so you can Zhenya, he handles all of the Bible Institute ministry. Now, we'll talk about that in a minute, but basically the CMI ministry, we have 13 Bible schools throughout Ukraine, Armenia, and Belarus. And basically what that is if your church wanted to help further equip the membership with biblical teaching, we go to the local church, help them with material and teachers and training to help that local church to grow and become more effective and better equipped for more effective multiplication ministry. So there's that throughout Ukraine. We have that guy. Oksana was the secretary, librarian. Anya, she handled all the finances like bookkeeping. Bogdan was the dean of students. Kind of when all the students would come to us, he would make sure that they were getting their work done, as always kind of talk to them about their spiritual needs and development. Sasha handled all the online ministry. As the world progresses, everything's moving to online now. So we also had an online program for people who couldn't come to Kyiv or who just couldn't get away from work. And then Volodya, who's the director of the CMI Institute, Ukrainian led and operated. And my role with the CMI was really helping to cast vision about future ministry, but also helping with training of local pastors, going and holding seminars on evangelism, discipleship, local church dynamics, about church planting, multiplication, and helping in the local church, help to train local church leadership. So there are multiple levels of what we were doing there in Kyiv. One was there an accredited degree program, which is an associate's degree. So this is one of the courses that I taught there. This is a church dynamics class, local church class. Just a few pictures of the guys there. And most of these guys are either in some form of youth ministry or some form of deacon role or future pastoral position in their church. So this group actually comes to Kyiv and we hold a modular training. And then at the end of that training, they walk away with an associate's degree. There's another one of our teachers, their training. And there was a video there. But basically every week when we have a new group come in, we try to start each day with some worship or some form of call to worship, spiritual encouragement for them. It helps kind of unify the body of students, as well as just helps us kind of start off the day right, kind of reflecting on who God is, responding to his word in worship. Because we were located at the seminary, I had the opportunity to minister to a lot of other international folks. The seminary primarily operates in Russian, so we had students from Kazakhstan and all the other post-Soviet countries, that would come to Ukraine for training and then go back to their home countries and their churches. This is just a picture of one of the chapel services where I was able to speak and minister to them. I mentioned the regional Bible schools. This is another aspect of the ministry that you had a part of there. You can't see it super well, but all the little pink flags on the map are the locations of the different Bible schools throughout the country. And again, there's one in Armenia and one in Belarus that are not on the map. And these are local churches that are interested in helping just their body grow and help equip their local church members for more effective leadership and ministry. This is one of those schools. This was in Lebedin. It was in eastern Ukraine near the Russian border. Just a group of the students there. I give you, again, another Bible school, a different region. This one is closer to Kyiv, the capital city. There's a wide variety. The CMI ministry focused on training leadership, but that leadership also, it's not just pastoral leadership or deacon leadership. It also extends to Sunday school leadership or ladies' ministries leadership. So we have a lot of ladies that also attend that are leading Bible studies or leading children's ministries or leading ladies' ministries, which seemed to be a void there in a lot of the schools. There were pastoral training, but there wasn't a lot for just the local church membership to be able to be grown and equipped. This is a church that we attended before we came back from the States, Hope Church. We were able to start a Bible school there before we left as one of the first courses there. And we try to incorporate the pastor into the Bible school. So every Bible school that we start, the pastor of that local church is instrumental. It's a key person in the Bible school ministry. So here we have a group of graduates, and we're handing the pastor a gift bag of books, and there's different resources that he can use. Another aspect of the ministry that we were able to be a part of was an international Bible school. Now this is, in the distance, you see Mount Ararat, which is right there. And when I was in January, this past January, I was able to go to Armenia, and we opened up a Bible school there. There was a local church interested in the associates program. So the director and I went to Armenia for a week and a half, taught a course there and talked with the leadership about what it would take to start Bible school ministry there. So we were in Armenia. This is a group of the students that we had. And Armenia is interesting because it was part of the former Soviet Union. Everyone speaks Russian. There are Russian signs, but because it's no longer a Soviet state, they speak Armenian. So everything's Armenian and Russian. And so in Russian, I was able to interact with people. When we taught, they wanted it in Armenian. So I was able to teach in English, and then they translated into Armenian, which was kind of neat. So kind of a three-language thing going on there. So a good group of folks. So I was able to preach there on Sunday morning. It was a really cool pulpit. If you've ever seen that, it wouldn't fit in the bag, though. I couldn't bring it back on the plane. And just a class there with mainly folks that they're priming and they're kind of training for leadership. There were 3 key guys there that we were able to work with, as well as a number of ladies. This was when I was in Armenia, I was able to go help with a few church plants. And this is a church plant that's still meeting in a home that I was able to visit and teach one afternoon and just spend the afternoon visiting with them. Again, because they speak Russian, I was able to interact with them just on a personal level, do some counseling, and just kind of live life with them for a day. And it's a very rural area where this church plant is, where they kind of make their own cheese, they get their own milk, they're self-sustainable. So it's pretty neat, very hospitable, very warm people. This is another church plant I was able to go to while in Armenia. And this room is about the size of the whole house. And there were probably 15 to 20 people living in that house. There were a couple bedrooms on the side, but very small. If you can see, there's a little wood stove right here that kind of heated the whole house. And a very, very poor area, but we had a service there. I was able to teach, as well as Volodya with me. After the service, something interesting happened. Again, these people have nothing. And then after the service, they said, okay, we're going to have a supper of love. All right. So they get the table out and they fill it with food. And just very humbling to sit down in this home that they have nothing. And then they're just keep bringing food and just giving you everything that they have. So very hospitable people, very loving people. It was great to be able to interact with them there. A key aspect of ministry that I was very involved in was pastoral and leadership training. I mentioned that there were seminars and courses on evangelism and discipleship I was able to do throughout the country. This is one of those. We would go to a church that was interested in engaging their people more in evangelism and discipleship. We would have a day-long seminar and then leave them with resources that they could continue on in the church with. Again, it's an interactive setting. You really want to teach in an inductive way, so you're kind of drawing the information out from people rather than just kind of spoon feeding them with everything. Another church there closer to Kyiv. And throughout the process, I was able to help Sasha here kind of learn how to do the training. So he's continuing it on with a few other people now. And this group of guys is a group of pastors from central to eastern Ukraine that we would come together 2 to 3 times a year for an expositional preaching training that we would put on. We would help facilitate. And just helping people to learn how to study God's word more effectively and more accurately, and then be able to build a sermon, know what to include, how to relay that information effectively to the people. Most preachers in Ukraine are what you'd call kind of a soapbox topical. They'll read a verse and then walk away from it and never really address it. It's just whatever is on their mind for the day. That's what they're talking about. So getting a group of guys to really dig in and say, this is what the text says. It doesn't matter what I say. This is what the text says, and that's kind of integrated into their preaching. It was interesting to see. It was great. And we started out with the missionaries teaching, and the Ukrainian men just kind of being active participants. A lot of small group work, but then we said, all right, well now we're going to give you chunks of the training, and we did a section, and then we had some key leaders. They did a section. So now by the 3rd or 4th year of this training, the Ukrainian men are doing all the training. There's 3 key leaders that kind of we identified, and the missionaries are kind of sitting back, just kind of watching and giving advice and counseling. So it's really that kind of 2 Timothy 2:2 in action there, which is neat to see. People getting excited about it, hearing stories about how the congregation is responding to the teaching and preaching now, and then just some practical application. Every other summer, we would do something called the Extreme Summer Institute, which this last year was in Lebedin, which is in eastern Ukraine near the Russia border. We went there to help a church put on a youth camp. And the students from CMI would come, and in the evenings, they would have a class they would get credit for. But then from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, we would help the church do their VBS. It was a 2-week-long vacation Bible school. We helped with 1 week of it. There's a picture of the coursework the students did. But then every day, I would say 200 or so kids would come from the village that we were in and interact with us and the teachers there. I got on bouncy house duty, so I know how to get them in like 2 minutes and they get out. So everybody lived. It's all right. But the kids were able to interact with this part of the ministry too, as well as Veronica. So it was neat to see the whole family be able to go and just invest in the lives of people and in this local church here. Whether it was just in a classroom or connecting with a new friend or sometimes just playing a game. All the kids were able to be a part, and it was a good experience for the whole family. And even some of my colleagues were able to, let their true colors shine through a little bit. So, yep, those are the leaders of tomorrow right there. So it was a good time for all the family, good experience. Aside from the academic aspect of ministry and the seminary training, we were able to help with a few church plants and church revitalizations. One was Hope Church, which started out as what we thought was kind of a good, solid church, but ended up being a revitalization where some things happened with the pastor, and we were there to kind of help through some of that process. This was a baptism. Usually we only did baptisms in the summer, because in the winter the river would freeze. It's a little hard to do baptisms there. And these are just 2 ladies that one, the younger lady you see there, has an interesting story where they just, in order to get married, in their culture, if you want to get married, if you're a baptized member of the church, but say your wife isn't, the church won't acknowledge your marriage. So a lot of things happen, and this couple, she repented and got her life right. with God, and then became a church member, was baptized, and it was kind of neat to see that process of coming before the church, asking for forgiveness, asking God for forgiveness, kind of that outworkings of not fully church discipline, but the result of it. So it was great to be a part of that also. The kids had a good opportunity in the churches we were in to help out with singing and youth choir and different outreach aspects. This was an English club that Tabitha was able to help with. Luke and Elizabeth, I think, helped a little bit too. There was a public school near the church that invited the youth group to come and do English camp a few times. So they were able to go in the public school, do an English camp, share the gospel with people. Because if you speak English as a native speaker, you can do pretty much whatever you want. And people are going to welcome that because everybody wants to learn English. Everyone wants to travel. This is a new church plant we were able to help get started. It started off as a few people meeting in a living room, just praying about what God would do in this area, and resulted in a church plant that was established. This was a banquet hall that we rented and were able to hold meetings in and are still meeting in today, and finally named it Renewal Church in the area that we were living in. And this is a picture from kind of the beginning when everyone has to do everything. And then the church did progress. This was a Christmas outreach where we'd have a puppet show and different things for neighborhood kids where 50, 60 kids would come at a time to participate in that. As you can see there. Carnivals are kind of a popular thing right now for churches to engage their communities with. So anytime you have cotton candy and free games, you're going to get a crowd of kids. And this is that Asokoki area, that neighborhood area where the church was, where you can see just the attempts of the church to get their name out and interact and invest in the community. And it's an apartment community. Everyone lives rather close together in tall 20-some story buildings. There's a lot of people in a very small area of land. This was a medical outreach we were able to help with last summer. It was in western Ukraine. And over 6 clinic days, 1,500 or so people came through the clinic. And every person who came through the clinic was able to hear a gospel presentation. And the church that we were helping support through this endeavor was able to see visitors come and see their numbers increase through it. So this was with an organization called Operation Renewed Hope. Jan Milton heads that up if you're familiar with him. Veronica was able to invest in ministry to ladies a lot. This is a group of ladies, a ladies' Bible study that came to our home several times, and she was able to just minister to them and spoke several times. And we just opened up our home as a point of hospitality, inviting the community in. And another picture, some folks from the area. Selfies are very popular, so everybody knows how to do a good selfie. Yeah, and because we speak English fairly well, we were able to. Well, previous to this, I had a British guy come up to me and say, "Listen, you do not speak English, okay? You speak American. So let's get that straight." But American English is very popular because if you think all your movies and your popular music is coming generally from America, so if you speak American English, like proper American English, it's very popular. So we were able to interact with a few English language schools that would invite us in, and we had liberty to share whatever we wanted to share as long as it was in English. So great opportunities there. Another English club that I was able to help do some teaching in. Illustration there. And then we were able to help out with some other camps and things. This was actually a camp a missionary group asked us to come and do a children's camp for the week to the actual MK. So we ministered to them with games and lessons and practicing our shooting of one another. So it's a good time when you got a bunch of missionaries shooting each other, right? But it was a blessing to them. They could focus on their meetings, and we invested in the kids for 3 or 4 days. So it was a blessing to us also. Just share some next steps with you. I know that was kind of a fast overview of 4 years. Feel free to connect with us after the service if you want to know more about any things or if you have any questions. Some next steps. Well, we're currently on furlough. We are currently reporting to our supporting churches and just really seeking God's will about the things that He would have us do next. I do have an opportunity to return to Armenia potentially in the fall they've invited me to come back and teach a course on evangelism and discipleship. So just something as you think about it, pray with us about that. We're praying a lot about it and considering whether that's something God would have us do. It's an expense from here. It was cheap to go from Ukraine to Armenia. It's a lot more expensive to go from here. So it'd be great to be a part of that, but we'll have to see how God provides for that. As we're on furlough, we're praying about what God would have us do. And the thing that we came back on a regularly scheduled furlough, and we went through kind of reflecting on how God has led us to this point over these last 10 years and helped us realize our giftedness and really identify our talents and specific desires for ministry. And he used our sending church leadership in just helping us come to an ultimate decision. About short version, about a year ago, we shared with our sending church that someday we felt like God was leading us into a pastoral ministry. And in North America, we were mainly in Ukraine. We were a part of a support ministry. The church is at a state in Ukraine where really Ukrainians need to be pastoring and need to be leading. And they are. And to go to a place where an American is planting or is pastoring a church is kind of taking the missiology one step backwards because it's already been nationalized. And we believe in an indigenous church planting principle, which is nationals multiplying. So the American missionary is really more of a facilitator, a supporter, a teacher, a trainer. And that was what we did, and we enjoyed it. Having God placed on our heart more of a pastoral, serving, shepherding ministry, we talked with our sending church, and they recommended that on this furlough, we really find a place in North America to do church planting or church revitalization. And after a lot of praying and talking with our sending church and several just advisors, we felt like that advice should be followed and kind of submitted to as our sending church asking us to do that. So while we're on furlough, we're praying about what God would have us to do next. We're praying that God would show us a North American revitalization or replant ministry. And he has given us a lot of opportunities networking with folks in North America. There's a replant situation in Ohio now that has contacted us that we're kind of praying through. So we would ask you to just pray with us about that and be happy to share more details about that with you. Just how God led us one step after another. It was definitely not the timing that we thought, but I think it was the timing that God wanted as we kind of submit to our sending church leadership in that way and follow their leading and their guidance. Things you can pray for. Again, wisdom to follow God's leading. That we would be faithful in ministry as God has called us to ministry. That we'd be faithful in that. That we'd be faithful to the call to teach and to preach and to make disciples. Right now, we're unsure if we're going to continue to be support-based or not. So that's something you can pray with us about. If it's a church replant opportunity, then probably for a few more years, we'll have to be support-based. So again, something that we don't know, but we trust God to provide. So we'd appreciate your prayers in that way. The transition for our family. Our kids have lived overseas pretty much their whole life. So coming back to America wasn't so much coming home, but was kind of coming to this scary new place where our grandparents live. So just kind of understanding that, it kind of puts yourself in their shoes. It's a change to be back in America. And for us, Veronica and I who grew up here, it's home. But for them, it's kind of, okay, well, this is a new place to get used to. And that we would just be used by God for his glory. And I want to take, if I could, the last 15 minutes or so and just share with you a passage that I think God used in my heart to help lead us to more of a focus on shepherding, pastoral, church planting, church revitalizing ministry, and invite you to touch base with us after the service and talk with Veronica and myself if you have any questions or want to know more about something. If we can share something extra with you, we'd be happy to do that. I want to start by taking a brief poll. If I move this, is that going to be okay? Wonderful. All right, I want to start by taking a brief poll. Let's think about the Great Commission. I already gave you the answer up there. So, okay, what's the Great Commission, right? Go therefore and do what? Make disciples, right? Teaching them to observe everything that Christ taught, right? So what two words can we boil the Great Commission down to? If you had to boil it down, what two words could you boil it down to? You're right. Evangelism and teaching. Making disciples, right? How many of us believe today that evangelism is important? Let's see a show of hands. Okay? Let me clarify. How many people believe that evangelism is important, let's say essential to making disciples? Okay? Same show of hands, all right? Now, what about making disciples? I want to challenge you tonight to think about what environment is necessary to make evangelism and discipleship happen most often, most frequently, right? What functions of a church need to happen that make evangelism and discipleship most natural, right? The chart I put up there is not original with me, but I thought it was pretty good. All right, Great Commission method. Evangelism in an established church. Does evangelism always happen? Not always. Does teaching always happen? Usually. Absolutely. All right. Are disciples made? Sometimes. All right, let's think about a parachurch outreach. Okay, a lot of us go to the Wilds as one camp, and there's several other good Christian camps around. Does evangelism happen? Yeah, that's kind of what they do, right? It happens. Does teaching happen? Sometimes. Not always, sometimes. Are disciples made? Maybe. Church planting. Okay, when you're planting a church, the church was planted, 15 years ago? 16 years ago. When the church was initially being planted, was evangelism done? Absolutely. Okay, when you start with only a handful and you grow to this number, it has to happen. Was teaching done? It's questionable, right? It's iffy. Let's assume yes. Let's assume the answer is yes. Were disciples made? I think so. All right, so I'm going to suggest to you that the environment of a church plant is going to be the most opportune time for evangelism and discipleship to be actively done, to be most naturally done. And it embodies both of the church plant or church planting or revitalizing, kind of embodies both steps of the Great Commission. And I think church planting needs to be given a lot more priority among churches seeking to be obedient to Christ's command. You know, there are many ways you can be involved in church planting, right? You can send, you can go, you can give, you can help to revitalize, but all of those steps need to be done with intentionality. Now, God's left us with a foundational church planting ministry strategy that we can build on in the book of Acts. Now, let's look at that in Acts chapter 14. And it's a very simple plan for church planting or church replanting or revitalizing, renewal. And that's going to be reach the lost, teach the saved, and plant new churches. Okay? It's not super complicated, but I think that we're giving a pattern here in Acts chapter 14 that we can follow. So, as you turn there, okay, Acts is a really kind of neat book. A lot of action and stuff happens. In chapter 2 is a pivotal point where you see the gospel being contextualized. Okay, you see Peter is preaching to predominantly Jewish audience, right? And as he's preaching, he's Jewish, they're Jewish, they get it, right? 3,000 people are added to the church. There's not a lot of worldview noise, as we say. There's not a lot of disagreement in culture. Everyone understands. In Acts chapter 14, though, when Paul and Barnabas go to Lystra, and in Acts 17, those are two places where there's a lot of cultural noise, we could say. There's differences in the culture, okay? And as we're in Acts chapter 14, let's picture the situation, okay? Verses 8 through 18 tell of the event where Paul and Barnabas went to Lystra. They had been run out of Iconium, and they had fled to Lystra preaching the gospel. The text tells us that as soon as they came into town, they met a man crippled from birth, and he had never walked. This man listened to Paul speak, Paul sees that he has faith. He believes what Paul has been saying. And Paul says, stand up. And what happens? He stands up. When the people saw this, they shouted, the gods have come down among us. Zeus and Hermes, they're here. Well, they threw this holy hoedown right there. And they brought out the decorations and all the livestock. And of course, Paul, he tries to stop them and tells them that he's not a god, but he serves the true and living God who created everything. And Paul tries to help them understand, but people are so focused on these sacrifices, on these offerings to people who they think are gods that they really don't listen. Now, why were the people so passionate about sacrificing to Zeus and Hermes? Well, you could have several responses. There is a legend that if it's true, well, we know it's not true, but if the people believe this legend, let's say that, it could give some insight. And that's centuries before, the legend goes that Zeus and Hermes disguised themselves and they came to town. They came to Lystra. And they asked everyone for hospitality. They went to this home, this person, this person. No one would give them the time of day. Well, they finally found this old man and his wife, and they offered them, they said, come into our home. They fed them. And then Zeus and Hermes revealed themselves and said, okay, well, because you were kind to us, showed us kindness, we're going to make you a priest and priestess. They transformed their house into this giant temple, and then they flooded the entire city, killed everybody. So that's their worldview, okay? Paul and Barnabas come to town. This guy that's never walked starts walking. Zeus and Hermes are here. You know, we're not going to mess up like those people did, right? We're gonna offer sacrifices. We're going to go just with zeal for this. So that's kind of their worldview that Paul is speaking the gospel into. Now, while all that was happening, Jews came from Antioch and Iconium. Remember, Antioch and Pisidia was the place where Paul and Barnabas had been in chapter 13, where a group of zealous Jews had begun to contradict Paul and speak lies. Then, in the beginning of chapter 14, Paul and Barnabas travel to Iconium. Remember, they leave, and then they leave there under threat of being stoned. And then now in Lystra, some Jews from Antioch and Iconium have convinced the Lystrian crowds to stone Paul. Okay, so they stone him, they drag him out of the city, leaving him for dead. And what does Paul do? Well, once the other disciples gather around him, he gets up. He goes back into town for the night, and then he moves to the next city, Derbe, with Barnabas in the morning. So it's amazing to see God working in the lives of those who are faithful to him. Like take Paul's example here in Acts chapter 14. No matter the response, his obligation was to remain faithful to the Great Commission, to the ministry that he had been given. Okay, he'd been stoned. He gets off and he's like, yep, I can take that. Right? He goes back in. And that brings us to verse 21, which we're going to look at 3 verses, starting in verse 21. And when they had preached the gospel to that city and had taught many, they returned again to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, confirming the souls of the disciples and exhorting them to continue in the faith, and that we must through much tribulation enter in the kingdom of God. And when they had ordained them elders in every church and had prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord on whom they believed. Now, after this, we're told Paul and Barnabas, after verse 23 happens, we're told that they went back to Antioch in Syria. They went back to their home church and gave a report of all that God had done, kind of like we're doing tonight. You know, those 3 verses give us a summary of the ministry model that was used in the early church multiplication process. Okay, and I've been more and more convinced over the past few years that in order to truly reach our Jerusalems, our Judeas, and our Samarias, we need to be actively engaged in planting new churches. Now, not just new churches, but planting churches that plant churches. Church planting churches. So let's look briefly here at these 3 verses again, at this model of ministry that's laid out for us in the text. Okay, verse 21 shows us the proclaiming aspect of ministry. Okay, look at verse 21 again. And when they had preached the gospel to that city and had taught many, they returned again to Lystra and Iconium and Antioch. Now, what's the action in this verse? right? They were doing what? They were preaching, right? They were evangelizing the unsaved. They were preaching the gospel. They were making disciples. Okay, that's the action there. They were proclaiming. Look at verse 22 shows us the perfecting aspect of ministry. Confirming or perfecting the souls of the disciples and exhorting them to continue in the faith, and that we must, through much tribulation, enter into the kingdom of God. Okay, what's the action in this verse? Okay, that word confirming could also be strengthening. Strengthening the souls of the disciples. Okay, they were edifying the believers. They were encouraging. They were strengthening those of the faith, people in the church. Okay, so there's a proclaiming aspect of ministry. There's a perfecting, strengthening. And then in verse 23 shows us the planting aspect of ministry. And when they had ordained them elders in every church and had prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord on whom they believed. Now, what's the action in that verse? Well, I suggest it's establishing local churches, appointing and committing local church leadership to continue that pattern of ministry. Now, friends, if we're going to be effective in reaching the lost for Christ in our area, right, we have to be intentionally active in all three aspects of ministry. Proclaiming the gospel, perfecting the saints, planting new churches. Okay, that can take different forms, but all three ingredients need to be there. A friend and mentor of mine with about 50 years of North American church planting experience said this. Let me read you what he said. God's great desire is that his church and churches be publicly on display to everyone. But for this to happen, the church has to be everywhere. Thus, where Christ's church is not yet on display, local churches must be multiplied. Because the local church is God's plan to reach the world today, to publicly manifest his wisdom, power, love, and salvation to all, it's imperative that God's people give priority to establishing new churches worldwide. God wants the truth about his story and his character made known amidst every people. Now the question is, how do we do that? Through church planting, through proclaiming the gospel, through perfecting the saints, and through planting new churches. Okay, those are three ingredients to an effective ministry. And, I applaud the steps that a lot of local churches are making today. Doing outreach, focusing on evangelism, focusing on discipleship, cultivating cultures of discipleship, wanting to see disciples, not just disciples made, but disciples that make disciples, okay, that result in churches that plant churches. I just want to challenge you tonight. Don't stop where you are. Okay, don't stop here. There's still a vital aspect to ministry, that ministry model that's laid out in the Bible that still needs to be engaged in, right? Church planting. Remember that no matter what situation we see the early church in and the early church planters in throughout the book of Acts, they continued on. Like a main idea that we could take away from that text is that no matter the response, our obligation is to remain faithful to the Great Commission, the ministry that God's given us. Now, sharing the gospel, strengthening believers, seeing the church multiply, seeing churches that plant churches for God's glory. Amen? All right, let's pray. Dear God, Lord, we thank you and praise you just that you choose to use